Mhm. Well, it's 12:02, and I don't want to be, really machmir, really strict about this stuff, but I do have to say that I'm scheduled to be part of a community dialogue on race that starts at 1 o'clock.
Uh,
So I want to start as close to our actual start time as we can, and so we have as much time as we can have in order to talk about whatever we're going to talk about, because I'm going to have to get off as promptly as possible at 1. So I apologize in advance that might be a little bit, um, uh, I hope it isn't uncomfortable. It might be a little precipitous, and it's not anything else other than the fact that I kind of, a little overcommitted. So I'll do the best I can without damaging our class. Okay, so actually, we were just talking, Stephanie and I, and about the general approach that mostly we tend to take, and I am as responsible for this as anybody else. When we talk about character development or spiritual development, we often talk about it from the standpoint of our deficiencies, things that we don't do well, things that we want to improve, things that we want to develop in some way because right now they're not where they ought to be. And uh, that's okay. But I think it tends to also, at the same time, give us a negative impression of ourselves, that we are coming from this point of this direction of lack, of deficiency, and that's not exactly incorrect, but it's not all there is. What there is, however, is really kind of a flip side to this, and I'll say a couple of words very quickly in terms of what that flip side is. And some of you already know that in rabbinic thought, you have the Yetzer Ra and the Yetzer Tov. Usually gets translated as the evil inclination and the good inclination. And I think actually, from my point of view, that is not an incorrect translation, but it's not a very helpful translation. Because the Yetzer Ra and the inclination, the good inclination, so-called, really is more like the inclination toward evil or wrong or the deficient. And the Yetzer Tov is not the inclination to be good necessarily, but the inclination toward the good. So I think these are more helpful ways of thinking about it. And all human beings, from the rabbi's point of view, have both sides as part of their characters. We all are connected to the Yetzer Ra, the inclination toward the negative or the evil or the bad, however you want to translate it, whichever way seems less counterproductive, and the Yetzer Tov, the inclination towards the positive or the good or the valuable. So what I have is a little 8-minute film that was done by a woman named Tiffany Schlein. Tiffany Schlein is maybe known to some of you because she is the person who put together another short film called The Tribe, which is a wonderful, wonderful 15, 16-minute introduction to Jewish history and culture. It is absolutely phenomenon. And if you are interested at any point in your lives in helping other people, whether they're Jewish or they're not Jewish, to have some appreciation of what being Jewish or what Judaism is all about, this is by far, in my opinion, the best place to start out. And it's remarkably entertaining and well done, lots of high production values and so forth. Well, this short film today is in the same general ballpark. It is instead, though, emphasizing the qualities, the strengths, the the elements of who we are, what we already are, that don't have to be overcome or corrected for, but which we need to develop in order to grow and to become the kind of people that we would like to be. So it's kind of the flip side. It's the Yetzer Tov to the usual way of thinking about these matters, which is the Yetzer Ra side. We're not talking now about what we lack, but what we already have. And I put this out there because I want to introduce into our discussions this idea that character development or ethical development or personality development, whatever term you like to use for what we're doing, is not only about compensating or overcoming what is not working or which should work better, but taking advantage of and building on what we already have that can be a foundation for where we want to go, where we want to be in the future. Am I being clear? Hello?
Hello, yes.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Yes.
All right. So, so Kim, if you wouldn't mind starting that little film, that would be just dandy. And then we'll come back together again in 8 minutes after it's over and do a little debriefing.
Okay, and tell me if the sound isn't good. I'm doing it in a way I haven't done it before.
Okay.
With a little bit of it.
There are 7 billion, well actually 7.1 billion humans on the planet. And each one of us has a unique character. So what determines your character? You do, and all the people around you. And of course some genetics too. But there's new science proving that if you focus on certain parts of who you are, you can develop your character and ultimately live a more meaningful, successful, and happy life, no matter what your circumstances. I mean, isn't that what we're all trying to figure out?
Oh, what?
This whole idea about developing our character really took shape in 2004, when 2 psychologists suggested that instead of just focusing on all the things that can go wrong with us, it's also important to celebrate all the things that can go right. You see, they looked throughout history to identify core virtues that humans across cultures have agreed lead to a meaningful life. And then they identified 24 character strengths that, when practiced and developed, could lead to these virtues. And they organized them, like scientists have done throughout history to understand things better. These groundbreaking studies showed that every person is a unique combination of these strengths. Like for me, I'm high on curiosity. I could work a little on the prudence. Actually, what is prudence? Anyhow, one of the most interesting parts of all this is they found that if we focus on building upon the strengths we have, it has a lasting effect on our happiness and well-being. So think about it. What are your top 5 strengths? Now, another part of this is that you can help shape other people's character too. They found that the key to human relationships is ultimately appreciating the character strengths in others. To explore this, we asked people around the world, who do you admire and why?
I admire my mother the most because she's very loving and caring.
Восхищаюсь целеустремленными людьми, которые готовы бороться за свою цель.
The person I admire the most is Einstein, of course.
My sister, because she is so tough and so brave.
People who use their creative energy to make the world a better place.
This powerful new framework paved the way for a whole new era of social science that, it turns out, is unpacking a very old idea. how do we develop these character strengths? One theory suggests that people either have a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. A fixed mindset is the belief that we're born with certain abilities, intelligence, and talents, and we're stuck with it. A growth mindset is believing I can change. If I set my mind to it, I can do anything. Let's take, for example, failing at something. With a fixed mindset, failing means I'm a failure. A growth mindset understands failure happens to everyone. Of course, it's hard, I've been there, but it's also something to learn from, something to improve upon. Fortunately, we can all develop a growth mindset. It takes practice and it takes encouragement from the people around us, but it can be learned. And it's all because of an amazing part of the human brain called the prefrontal cortex. It's like our brain's control panel that orchestrates our thoughts and actions, what many scientists call executive functions. Or what neuroscientist Adele Diamond, calls self-regulations. I like to think of it as my self-control filter, the thing that keeps my impulses and emotions in check. And the way to strengthen that filter is as simple as taking a moment, focusing your attention, and asking yourself, is what I'm about to do a reflection of who I am and who I want to be? So while we're all becoming more and more distracted in this age of distraction, we need to remember to take a moment and think. There are a lot of new exciting conversations happening about character. One that I find interesting is that there are 7 strengths in particular that can be real game changers in academic achievement, success, and happiness, no matter what your circumstances. Those 7 are optimism, gratitude, social intelligence, curiosity, self-control, enthusiasm, and perseverance, also known as grit. While there have been many different theories about character throughout history, what scientists in this field agree on is that character matters, and that character strengths can be learned, practiced, and cultivated. So when you think about yourself, what are your strengths? And how can you find ways to use them more in your home, work, school, and community? It's like you have these superpowers, and focusing your attention on them makes them stronger. And then, if you focus on the people around you and their strengths, it makes them stronger too. As each of us becomes our best versions of ourselves and encourages others to do the same, we can lead to important changes throughout the world. Just imagine a world infused with more humanity, justice, courage, wisdom, and compassion. So if you can be a better version of yourself, how do you want to be?
I definitely want to be somebody that other people can feel they can rely on.
A man who was courageous.
Somebody who went for their goals.
As a risk taker.
Kind.
Exactly like my mom, beautiful, strong, and powerful.
I want people to say that I'm funny.
Who is a nice person. Generous.
Be yourself.
Kind.
Accountable.
Incondicional.
Amanichada.
También sensible.
Profesional.
Charismática.
I want to become someone who, when the time comes for me to die, I go, oh my goodness, I have used it up. I have wrung it dry.
Everybody is a star. They just need to learn how to shine.
Okay.
You do. And all.
That's it. It's a pretty good little video, isn't it? I hope you enjoyed it. Let's get back to our regular sort of thing. I mean, I want to take off from here. I didn't want to, to over-determine the video, but you probably noticed, even without my saying much about it, how many of the ideas in the video replicate things that the rabbis have been teaching us for generations. The idea, for example, that we can change, that we can be different, that it's possible to build on who we already are. And the idea of that is something that's important to bear in mind. It's not just that we have some positive characteristics and we can take advantage of that. You know, the rabbi's notion is that the Yetzer Ra, the inclination to do the negative, is itself of great value because it can be transformed into something positive. I mean, the idea that the rabbis have been teaching us for years is not that we need to somehow separate ourselves from those parts of us that are not so terrific, but to embrace them and to transform them. So the idea of there being positive things to build on and even negative things to build on is sort of the basic elements of character from the rabbinic point of view. There are many other elements in the video that make similar sorts of points. And I want to kind of open it up a little bit from this to talk about your reactions to the video. I really want to get at this idea of what is the challenge that we are that's being posed to us. We're asked, what kind of person do we want to be? And we get a whole bunch of different kinds of possible answers, but I'm interested in your answers and in what a class like this can do to help you to move forward towards those qualities or those characteristics that you want to develop. So I'm going to open this up and see where it all leads us.
Well,
yeah, Kim.
Yeah, I always like to answer a different question. So the other question would be why? Why do we want to build character?
Okay, this was specifically addressed in a couple of different ways in the video, and I think it's probably worth paying attention to that, and then to build on that, to expand on that.
I know the community is so important in Judaism.
Yes, and yet let's take that as a starting point. So here's one way of looking at that. The idea of character development or spiritual development is that it has an impact not only on ourselves, but on other people. It's kind of creating a kind of, if you want to put it this way, this might be a little bit more, touchy-feely than I would normally be inclined to, but you create a kind of energy around who you are and what you do, and that this has some virtue in and of itself. But the way we talk about that virtue in Judaism is, there are several possibilities, but it's what we talk about in terms of tikkun olam, the repairing of the world. The repairing of the world is important first and foremost because it begins with the repairing of ourselves. And the purpose of repairing ourselves is so that we can more effectively repair the world around us. That means our families, our communities, our nations, and so on and so forth. So there's a much larger agenda for spiritual or character development than we might normally think. It's not about contemplating your navel. It's not about wondering what is important just to me, but what is important to me important because it's important in the larger context.
I mentioned to you there was one person who didn't want to take the class because he thought it was just like self-improvement.
Yes.
And he wanted to help the world. He didn't want to.
Well.
Yeah. So.
I understand that, and I understand why. Not, but I don't know this particular person, but I understand why some people might look at it that way. I don't want to get into sort of a negative critique of what we have been taught by some other traditions, But the idea that somehow what is valuable is what's valuable in the narrow framework of ourselves, and that's as far as it goes. Well, that's not the Jewish way of viewing things.
Yeah, right. So it's not so we'll go to heaven, and it's not so we'll get rich and famous.
It's not individual. Yeah, and unfortunately, and this is not, I don't think, particularly an accurate representation of Christianity, but it has become a popular idea about Christianity in the last 15 or 20 years, this sort of prosperity gospel. You know, this is all about doing what God wants us to do is a sign and a facilitator of our own personal success. That is, I don't think that's Christianity at its best, and it's certainly not any idea that that is coherent or which fits with the Jewish point of view. So, having said that, here's something else to bear in mind. Can any of us learn and grow and develop without reference both to what there is about us that needs to change because it is not effective, and that what has to change is what we already have, but we need to have more of, okay? It's not as if none of us are ever honest. We're all honest sometimes, and we pursue and we pay attention to honesty as a midah, as a characteristic, parts of the time. But it is also true that sometimes we don't. And what do we do with the fact that we sometimes miss the mark on that? And what do we do with the fact that sometimes we do follow through on those things? What does that mean? What is the significance of the fact that sometimes we are honest and we act out of that kind of virtue? Both of those things are relevant. So let's go on. Anybody else have a comment they want to add to it? Did I just talk too much?
No, I just I had my microphone on mute.
Oh, okay, Michael, you're on then.
So I don't make this comment out of thinking about other people. Yeah. I make this comment as a reflection of who I am. And I've always been intrigued by the notion of cats in the wild needing to mate.
Cats, as in
cats, leopards and tigers and big cats.
Big cats, okay.
And they have territories, and they're very aggressive, and want to take care of themselves. And if they see a competitor, which is any other cat of their species, they're liable to attack them. So how do they ever mate and move on from there? So they somehow overcome that competitive, selfish desire and let other things come up that allow the species to propagate.
So this is the transformation of the Yetzer Hara into something valuable.
I don't know if it's transformation.
Okay, maybe not.
Maybe a little more of a sublimation. In other words, I think we all have good characteristics.
Yes.
But we've lived a history of the way in which our personalities have formed that emphasizes certain things potentially from a self-preservational perspective or a selfish perspective, and they've worked for us. And so when we take a look at this, at these characteristics, there's the opportunity to recognize those that have sort of a valence of satisfaction beyond that's been exemplified by acts of selfishness or self-preservation. And the study of this has the possibility of identifying them and finding them. And as the film said, one of the best things I liked about it is that in any moment of action, before you do the action, stop and look at whether or not, and look at the sort of potential effects of what it is. And then you go do what you're going to do. And sometimes it's emphasizing the good, what we would call the Yetzer Tov, or what we would call the Yetzer Hara. But that gives us the opportunity to say, okay, here's something that could come that's good if I did it this way rather than doing it that way.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot to be said for that, Michael, and I want to emphasize it by adding one little schmitchik to it, which is that what we take to be this this idea of in Eastern traditions, we might call it mindfulness. The idea is to be aware of and to be cognizant of and to pay attention to what it is that we're actually doing. And I think what I'm trying to say in making that point is that whether it is something that is the Yetzer Tov, something that's a good inclination, that's the sort of the easy case. The harder case is when there's something that is not so positive on the face of it, but which we engage in anyway. What is the significance of that? Why don't we take the approach that some religious traditions do of just trying to distance ourselves from what is wrong or what is deficient or what is less than good? Why don't we just try to somehow to negate all that? So I think the reason, yeah.
But Judaism, comes from a tradition of brachot.
Yes.
Where you say a blessing before you do the action.
Yes.
And so that gives you the pause. And in that pause, what you're doing by thanking God is saying, hey, this is the way it is. Thank you for having it be this way. And here's the specific piece of appreciation.
You know, that is a very, very important point, Michael. And the idea of the pursuit of a life of saying, depending on who you talk to, 100 blessings a day. The point of that is to be aware of the positive and significance of all of our actions, even actions that don't necessarily strike us as being positive in and of itself. And my favorite example of this is having sexual intercourse. I mean, in lots of religious traditions, sexuality and sexual intercourse is viewed negatively. It's dirty. It's something you should avoid, and people of great spiritual depth shy away from this kind of stuff. And if you have to get involved, all right, you get involved if you have to, but otherwise you would be best to avoid it. Well, that is not the Jewish point of view. The whole point is, let's say, why do we have sexual inclinations? Because we wouldn't have families if we didn't have sexual inclinations. We wouldn't build communities. We wouldn't build schools. There will be all sorts of things that we wouldn't bother to do because we absent ourselves from this part of life. And not only that, but it's a losing proposition. What's the track record of trying to live as if we don't have these feelings? You know, so
extermination.
Yeah, really. You know, so you have to say, well, what am I going to do with these feelings or inclinations or urges or whatever it is that we have? You have to embrace the fact that they exist, but you have to recontextualize them in such a way that their impact is going to be in line with the blessings that we want to have in our lives and in our personalities, regardless, as we move into the future. So is it?
Yeah.
I don't know, but to find a point on it, but if any of us were to say, okay, should we have children or not? If you're asking the question from the standpoint of a parent who has a teenager, the answer would be very different than if you're a parent who has a very cute little toddler, who's going off to kindergarten. If your child is a teenager, you might very well say, you know what? I need this, as my grandmother would say, like a lachen cup, which means like a blow to the head. Okay, that's what I need this for. That's what I need teenagers for.
It's hole in the head. Literally, it's hole in the head.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So would we choose that? I don't know if we would choose that. I think we might not choose it, but that would be a huge mistake. On lots of different levels. So having said all that, I want to ask if anybody else wants to add something to our discussion.
I will.
When?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you. Yes. You're on.
What you said way back at the beginning is still resonating for me in that.
Okay.
Because so steeply entrenched and drenched and soaked in the idea that the first inclination is to list all the bad things that I do and all the things I don't do well enough and all the negatives and all that. So it's very difficult, like, to even think about her question at the end of the movie about what do I want to be. Once again, that flood of negatives, the not good enough things come back. So the idea of practicing what is already good enough, the traits that you already have that are positive, it's very difficult because it's, then there's the message of ego but that's not even what I'm talking about. It's just very difficult to start there, and yet it seems like it's the only place to start if you don't want to beat yourself over the head all the time.
Well, there are people who make a virtue out of beating themselves over the head. I mean, there are all sorts of elements of one religious tradition or another which view self-punishment as being, flagellation and all that kind of stuff. I mean, somehow in one tradition or another, or one incarnation, as it were, of one tradition or another, somehow the idea that there is value in literally or figuratively beating ourselves up is, I can't say exactly it's a popular idea, but it's a common idea. But having said that, here's the thing. We might say that there is a quality that we as individuals or as a human society have, which are not so wonderful. Well, what is the significance of those elements that are not so wonderful? What is the meaning? What is it? Why do we, it's like that old song, why was I born? Why am I mean, why are we around if what we are essentially is this list of negative kinds of things? It seems to me that the special value of any of those is because it gives us an opportunity to start off from a certain point in order to change. It provides sort of the dynamism that's required in order to grow. So I don't think if the idea were just to remain wherever it is that we happen to be, it would be a waste of time. Not just a waste of time, it would make a lie out of creation. Mm-hmm. Why is God involved in that? Why would God get involved in creating a world if the only thing that comes out of it is the way things already are, and that's the end of the story. That seems to me to be, at the very least, a cruel joke on God's part. Now, from that point of view, all right. So what is there about those things that we do that are not so terrific, or that happen in the world that are not so terrific, and what significance do they have? Yeah, what's up?
Okay. So I guess my belief system right now is that a piece of God is in each one of us, including and especially me, that I have a piece of God in me and the tree of life image, that I've received a great deal from the divine, but I want to make sure that my piece of God is developed and, that I've done what I can with it in a benevolent and ethical way before I go. Kind of say the same thing as using up your body completely before you go, but this is at another level. And when I decided to have children, I was going to share this. My husband and I were not going to have children way back in our 30s. We were just not going to do it. We're not going to do it. We were not going to do it. And I had a vision of myself at the age that I am now. So, back then I was 32. So now I'm 68. So, and I just had this vision that I would not be okay with myself if I had passed up the opportunity to have children. And Eden exist. And so my husband, all the way through, John has asked me every, couple of years, are you fulfilled yet? Are you fulfilled yet? And I would always say, yeah, I'm fulfilled.
Question.
Give them back. It doesn't work that way. But we had a discussion recently where I said, think back now, and what would we have had if we didn't have children? We might have had a house in Colorado. We might have had a house in Hawaii. We might have had this, that, and the other. And we looked at each other and we went, I don't miss any of that. It might have been fun, but
here you are on the other side of it anyway. So what difference did it make? I mean, look, not that there wouldn't have been any difference, but here you are. You've gone through a big chunk of life. You should live to be 120, as they have to say. But even so, there are years left, and the point is that having had certain achievements or certain accomplishments or certain acquisitions or whatever, in and of themselves didn't make for success.
Right, not my view.
Yeah, so and this is going to continue, one hopes, into the future. It's interesting to hear you say that, Stephanie, because I think that for a lot of people that I know who decided sort of early on, well, we're not going to have kids, or we're not going to, buy into the house and the new car garage and whatever it is. I mean, I understand all those inclinations, but in the end, having helped to not just maintain, but to give expression to the continuation of life is kind of what we're here to do. I haven't taught this specifically for a little while, but and in my Torah study class on Thursdays, I mean, we haven't dealt with Genesis now in several years because it goes very slowly. However, in dealing with the creation stories, one of the points that I like to make is that you have to ask yourself the question, what is it that is added to creation that would not be there if human beings didn't exist? What would there be? I mean, what is it that we add to the mix that is indispensable, that could not be supplied in some other way? What is it? What is the rationale for our existence? And what I've come up with many times over the years is this idea that we human beings are the grain of sand in the oyster. We are the little bit of grit that causes growth and change and beauty to take place. It's the irritation that we provide, literally as well as figuratively. It's the irritation that we add to the system, which justifies our being around. It's not that we are positive in this way or positive in that way, or we have this strength or this other strength. I mean, it's that we provide, as my grandmother would have said, we are tumblers. That's who we are. We are tumblers who force things to react. Not just things, the world, other people, and so on and so forth. So this is, I think, what, from my point of view, we add to the mix and makes us necessary. It is our very capability of making ourselves and making the world around us different, which is the only real justification for our existence. That is a pretty, I don't know, pretty powerful, pretty heavy sort of message, I suppose, but not unreasonably so. I mean, we're here in order to annoy the world and what surrounds us. It's this kind of holy annoyance that we offer that gives us our value, you know. So you have a teenager. Why is the teenager there? Because the teenager's job is to annoy us. That's the teenager's job, and we have to figure out how to contend with that. You know. Yeah. Now, anybody else want to add to this? Yeah. Go ahead.
Wait, who's? I think you're
muted.
muted.
I saw a hand. I'm sorry.
Who? Michael? Me.
Oh, okay, Judith, you're on.
Are we a holy annoyance? I love that. Is it WHOLY or is it HO?
Well, I was thinking of HOLY, but maybe it's the other one as well. I don't know. I hadn't really thought about that, but I was thinking about the fact that our annoying people in the world and so on and so forth is part of what we do to make things holy, to make things better, to make things more and more complete. That's the purpose of our annoyance. You know, it's in a way it's to say something that's very, very simple, namely that in order for things to be better, there is the requirement that we have to make it inevitable that they change. And I say inevitable because it's easy enough to imagine a world, I think largely live in one, sad to say, where people devise unbelievable stratagems to avoid change in themselves and around them, you know. So I always have this image of a Rube Goldberg invention. Anybody here familiar with Rube Goldberg besides me?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, Michael
Oh,
is sufficient vintage, so he's heard of Rube Goldberg. For those of you who have not, Rube Goldberg was a quote-unquote inventor. He built these machines that were, I mean, talk about whimsical. They are the most whimsical things you could possibly imagine, but they were great challenging. They would have unbelievable number of parts, and you would start with one little something that a ball you would roll or whatever, and all these things would take place, and at the end there would be this tiny little thing that would happen. I mean, that's kind of what it is, you know. We have this. That's how we do things. I think that's how we do things. Yeah. And what we have, oh, Rube Goldberg, thank you so much. Look at that. There is his picture. Jim, you are amazing. I don't know that he ever invented anything that had any practical consequences. I think the point was that they were totally impractical. But they did do something. They did one thing. And you
just are you trying to say that we are the Rube Goldberg invention?
Yeah,
in other words, we do a lot of stupid shit, but in the end, there's something good that happens, although it's tiny.
It's like that old song. The music goes round and round, and it comes out here. I mean, there's lots of stuff that's happening, but the end product is this little teeny thing that happens. But the little teeny thing has value in and of itself. You look at a Rube Goldberg invention, it is a source of delight.
Yeah.
It really is. So having said that, the question that comes to my mind in the event is, what is it exactly that we are being called upon to do? I mean, if the way the world works is that we have a role to play in aggravating or annoying or pushing things in such a way that we can. Thank you so much for that.
Here, come here.
Yes. Okay.
Excuse us. It's coffee break time.
Yeah.
I'll bring you a spoon.
Thank you, sweetheart.
Come on, Bella.
The question that comes to my mind is, what is it exactly that is permissible? I mean, what is it that we are asked to do? I mean, in a sense, what we're asked to do is create some sense of what kinds of changes we want to take place in ourselves and in the world, and do those things, even those little teeny things that we can do to bring us a step along the way. It's not like you have to get to the end in order for any of it to count. And this is what Rabbi Tarfon taught. We are not required to complete the work of redemption, but neither are we free to desist from it. Which really means, in my view, all we can do is take a step. However much that changes things, that's how much it changes things. And if we take that step, we're good. That we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. That's really all. It would be nice, I suppose, if any of us could come up with some sort of single step that would cut the process short. That's why there are revolutionaries in the world. That's what revolution is about. Somebody has an idea that, well, we don't like these little incremental changes. Let's figure out, is there one thing we can do that will transform everything all at once? And I don't know if you would agree, I think some people at least would agree, that the attempts along those lines have been, generally speaking, abject failures. Mm-hmm. Because change doesn't happen that way. Change happens not just incrementally, but it happens as part of a process of growth.
I don't think we've been failures at this. Certainly more children are alive than were 100, 200 years ago because of improvement. More women are considered equal, and less war. I mean, yeah, things look pretty bad right now, to me anyhow. But we're a lot better off than we were 100 or 200 years ago. We as humanity.
I would agree. I mean, I have that same kind of hopeful, optimistic view, Judith, but it doesn't mean that I don't feel bereft sometimes. I do. I mean, I look at the news and I feel disappointment, or I feel bereft. I feel even sometimes betrayed. But I don't think any of that is the end. Yeah, Michael.
So I didn't think that you said that there wasn't change. I thought that what you were saying is that there's no, what did they used to call them? Enlightenment weekends? you'd go away for a weekend and you'd come back enlightened as a totally changed person.
Yeah.
I think all of us that have been on any of these kinds of paths recognize that it's a trip to Mecca, 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. And we make small incremental changes, and we see those changes when we examine how we interact with other people. And I think part of this program, for me anyway, in the studying in this particular discipline of Mussar, would be to acknowledge when we notice that our actions are along a positive vein towards what feels like making the world a slightly better place. And to see that and then use that as an encouragement, maybe to do more of it the next time.
You know, I think that includes a very important point, Michael, which is that, you know, from the standpoint of Jewish spiritual practice, it's not the idea that we are in search of some sort of cataclysmic change in ourselves. This is not about having a conversionary experience. This is not Saul on the road to Damascus.
Mm-hmm.
It is the everyday performance of the commandments. Even these little teeny commandments that seem, oh, why are we worried about that? It's such small potatoes. I mean, the whole point being, and the rabbis say this very clearly, we don't know what's small and what potatoes are small and what potatoes are large. It doesn't really matter. It's what is in front of us to do. And from that standpoint, it's only enough in terms of what we can be required to do to take the step that we are asked to take. That's it. Anything more than that, and we are, I think, apt to misconstrue what it is that we are doing. You know, I get asked a lot, for example, by people, Jewish and Gentile alike, to talk a little bit about keeping kosher and why is keeping kosher important and what is the significance about it. Why is it that we pay such attention to it? Even Jews who don't keep kosher pay attention to it in the way that they don't do it. It's in the back of our minds all the time. So here's my illustration of the point. It's a joke that I happen to like, and maybe you will, maybe you won't. The joke is, so this man decides he wants to find out what it is that God really wants. It could be Moses, it could be somebody like that. And he climbs the mountain, and God gives him the laws. And he happens to notice that among these laws is one, you shall not seethe a kid in its mother's milk. So yes, okay, God, it's interesting. What does that mean exactly? Does that mean that we have to have 2 sets of dishes? And God says, you shall not seethe a kid in its mother's milk. And the answer comes back, the question comes back, so does that mean that if I eat a meal of fleischiks and then I want to eat milchiks, that I have to wait 6 hours? But if I do it the other way around, and I start eating a meal of milchiks and then I want to eat fleischiks, I only have to wait 3 hours. And the answer comes back, you shall not seethe a kid in its mother's milk. And then the question is, well, okay, but does that mean that you have to have 2 sets of dishes, and you have to have 2 dishwashers, and you have to separate your silverware and so on and so forth? And the answer comes back and says, okay, have it your way. The reason I love that is that the story is all about the complications that we bring. in trying to understand what it is that we are asked to do. That even the smallest thing implies that there are complications, and we are unable to face anything that we're asked to do without recognizing or introducing the complications. And
so Kerry,
that becomes the reality.
So Kerry, I have a question for you.
Yeah, okay.
I spoke earlier about brachot.
Yes.
And you're supposed to say a bracha for a piece of bread for a sandwich you're going to have.
Yes.
You have to do it if you're going to have a ham sandwich.
Ah, that is a very good question. I like that question. And the reason I like that question is that from a certain point of view, you might say, I am thankful that I know the difference between a sandwich which is a ham sandwich and a sandwich which is not a ham sandwich.
Mm-hmm.
Having that distinction in mind is something that I am thankful for. Okay, it's one of the best examples of this kind of thinking is something that a prayer that occurs in the beginning of the morning service daily and on Shabbat, which is there's a long recitation of various functions of the body. We are thankful for the fact that certain vessels in the body are open when they're supposed to be open and not closed when they're supposed to be open, and other vessels are closed when they're supposed to be closed but are not open when they're supposed to be closed, and so on and so forth, back and forth. And we are thankful that our bodies are complicated in this way so that they function with the things that are open when they're supposed to be, and things that are closed when they're supposed to be closed, and so forth. Well, this is, I think, a remarkable kind of prayer, remarkable kind of blessing. I mean, the point being that all that is that we're thankful for is that things work the way that they are intended to work. That in and of itself is a blessing. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that we're not praying or being thankful because we have good health. No, we're just saying, well, things are open when they're supposed to be open, and they're closed when they're supposed to be closed. That's all. So from the standpoint of what it is that we are, what we're doing, it's not that we are thankful for having achieved, in this case, a certain level of health. Okay, I say a blessing because I'm now able to run a marathon. That's interesting, and it has its own virtue, but that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is the fact that the body has certain functions, certain physical realities, and we are thankful that they work as intended. Sometimes that's all you can hope for.
Kerry, I just noticed that it's 1 o'clock.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much for pointing that out, Michael. I appreciate it. Listen, this was a great topic, I hope. And
Wynn wanted to say something, but she's muted also.
No, she
said no. Okay.
Well, I do have to go, but I'm available, in some other context. So if somebody had a question they want to ask, I'm more than happy to do the best I can to answer it. And Michael, thank you so much for pointing out the time. I appreciate it. And you should all have received from Kim, either you've already received it or you're about to receive it, a rather long article on the stories of Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, one of the most important mystical rabbis and an important Mussar rabbi. And what I'm going to do, you can read as much of that as you would like. I don't have a specific assignment for you, but I would like you to read some of these stories. And I'm going to pick out a couple that we're going to read. They're all pretty short, and use them as our discussion starter for the next time we get together. Okay. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Be well, have a good Shabbos, and I'll talk to you again next week, if not before. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.